Welcome to a deep dive into the mind of a master negotiator. We'll be dissecting Chris Voss's book, Never Split the Difference. He's a former FBI hostage negotiator. So we're talking high-stakes persuasion tactics here. But don't worry, this isn't about turning you into a slick manipulator. Our mission today is to extract the most valuable, surprising, and dare I say, sneaky effective tactics you can use in your everyday life, from settling family squabbles to landing that dream job.
Voss's approach really flips the script on traditional negotiation. Instead of focusing on logic and power plays, it's all about understanding the psychology of the other person. Using that to your advantage. It's fascinating stuff.
Okay, so the first thing that made me raise an eyebrow was Voss's emphasis on the power of no. He even goes so far as to call it the negotiator's pure gold. Now that seems completely backwards. Isn't negotiation all about getting to yes?
You'd think so, right?
Uh,
But Voss argues that pushing for yes too early can actually backfire. It can make people defensive and less likely to cooperate.
he uses a great example from his early days working at a crisis hotline. He realized that just getting callers to say yes wasn't actually leading to any real change in their behavior. It was just a superficial agreement, not a genuine commitment.
Right. It's like a doctor getting a patient to agree to a treatment plan without addressing their underlying resistance. They might say yes to please the doctor, but they won't actually follow through with the treatment.
Voss actually had a similar experience when he was trying to get a job with the FBI. He had zero experience in law enforcement, but he managed to use no strategically to snag a coveted spot on the hostage negotiation team.
He recounts walking into the head of the crisis negotiation team's office
Yeah.
and boldly declaring, I want to be a hostage negotiator.
Mm.
And when she started grilling him about his qualifications,
Mhm.
training, credentials, experience, he simply answered no to every single question.
Wait, so he basically told her he was completely unqualified. That's a power move. Did she just laugh him out of the room?
Surprisingly, no. It seems his blunt honesty disarmed her. Instead of dismissing him, she was intrigued. He ended up getting the job over a pool of candidates who looked much better on paper.
Okay, I'm starting to see how no can be a bit of a secret weapon. It's unexpected, it breaks the tension, and it forces the other person to engage on your terms.
Exactly. Saying no can actually give the other person a sense of control and safety, which paradoxically makes them more open to negotiation.
So how do we actually wield this power of no in real life situations? Because I don't think my boss would appreciate me just saying no to every task they assign me.
Well, Voss provides some clever tactics.
No.
One is to use calibrated questions. These are open-ended questions designed to elicit a no response without explicitly using the word. For example, instead of asking someone, do you have a few minutes to talk? Try, is now a bad time to talk?
Oh, I see. It accomplishes the same goal of gauging their availability, but it gives them an easy out to say no without feeling pressured.
Precisely. And even when they do say no, it often opens up a more productive dialogue. They might say, yes, it is a bad time, but then suggest a better time. Or they might explain why it's not a good time, which gives you valuable insight into their priorities or concerns.
So it's about turning a potential brush-off into an opportunity to gather intel and build rapport.
Voss also points out that you can say no without actually saying the word. For instance,
Hmm.
instead of flatly rejecting a proposal, you can say, I appreciate the offer, but I'm not sure that's going to work for me right now.
Ah, so it's about being assertive but respectful, setting boundaries without slamming the door shut.
Now, to really see this in action, Voss tells a great story about his colleague, Marty Evilsizer. She was the FBI's crisis negotiation coordinator in Pittsburgh and had this reputation for being a tough but incredibly effective negotiator.
I bet that ruffled some feathers, especially in a male-dominated field like the FBI.
Definitely. Some of her male colleagues felt threatened by her competence and would deliberately challenge her authority during training sessions.
But Marty knew exactly how to handle this resistance. She'd use their no against them.
She'd ask questions like, does this sound like something you guys would ever do? Knowing they'd say no just to contradict her.
It's like reverse psychology, right? By getting them to repeatedly say no, she was subtly getting them to buy into her approach without even realizing it.
Exactly. This story illustrates how eliciting no responses can disarm resistance and subtly lead people to buy into your approach. It's brilliant.
It makes me think about those annoying telemarketers who use those yes ladder scripts. They try to get you to say yes a bunch of times, hoping you'll mindlessly agree to their pitch.
Right, and Voss points to research that suggests the opposite approach might be more effective. One of his students, a political fundraiser named Ben Ottenhoff, ran an experiment. He compared a traditional yes pattern script with a no-oriented script when soliciting donations.
So instead of asking leading questions like, do you think it's important to support our candidates? He was asking questions that encouraged donors to say no. What did he ask?
Something along the lines of, would you be against supporting candidates who share our values? It's subtle, but frames the question in a way that gets people thinking critically, instead of just agreeing.
The results of that experiment are fascinating. The no-oriented script actually resulted in significantly higher donation rates.
It seems counterintuitive, but saying no can actually make people feel more in control and more likely to commit to a decision.
Voss even uses the power of no in his emails to avoid being ignored. He'll send a follow-up email with a subject line like, have you given up on this project? Or, is it crazy to think we could still make this work?
It's a bold move, but it works. People are hardwired to respond to challenges or questions that pique their curiosity. By framing his emails as no questions, Voss is essentially forcing people to engage with him.
It's like he's hacking our psychology to get a response. Okay, my mind is officially blown. I'm starting to see no in a whole new light.
The takeaway here is that no isn't the enemy in a negotiation. It's a powerful tool that can help you build rapport, gather information, assert boundaries, and ultimately steer the conversation in the direction you want it to go.
So we've unlocked the power of no. What other counterintuitive negotiation gems does Voss have up his sleeve?
Well, he introduces a concept he calls tactical empathy, which might be the FBI's best-kept secret. It's about understanding the other person's emotions, not to manipulate them, but to genuinely understand where they're coming from and what's driving their behavior.
He's got this incredible story about a hostage situation in Harlem that really illustrates this concept.
Right. Voss and his team were called to an apartment where a group of armed fugitives had barricaded themselves inside. There was no phone line, so Voss had to communicate with them through the apartment door for hours.
Talk about pressure. I can't even imagine trying to have a calm conversation through a door with a bunch of armed criminals.
Well, Voss knew that going in with a confrontational approach would just escalate the situation. So he used what he calls his late-night FM DJ voice, a calm and reassuring tone, and focused on simply listening.
So he wasn't trying to argue with them or order them to surrender. He was just trying to understand their perspective.
Exactly. By listening attentively, he was able to de-escalate the situation and eventually build rapport with the fugitives, which allowed him to start negotiating their surrender.
It sounds like tactical empathy is about building trust and creating a sense of psychological safety.
Precisely. And Voss emphasizes that it's not about faking sincerity or being nice for the sake of it. It's about a genuine effort to understand the other person's perspective, even if you don't agree with them.
He talks about a specific technique called labeling that is key to tactical empathy. What's that all about?
Labeling is simply identifying and vocalizing the other person's emotions. It's saying things like, it seems like you're feeling frustrated, or it sounds like you're concerned about this.
So it's like you're holding up a mirror to their emotions and saying, I see you, I hear you. But doesn't that feel a bit awkward, like you're psychoanalyzing them on the spot?
It can feel that way at first. But Voss says that people rarely even notice when you're labeling their emotions. They're usually so focused on their own feelings that they don't register it as a technique.
Okay, but how do we know what labels to use? Do we have to become expert mind readers?
Not at all. It's about paying close attention to their words, their tone of voice, and their body language. Voss provides some helpful examples of labeling phrases you can use in different situations. For example, if someone seems angry, you might say, sounds like you're feeling really angry about this. If they seem hesitant, you could say, it seems like you're having some doubts.
So it's all about acknowledging their emotions without judgment. You're not saying they're right or wrong to feel that way. You're simply reflecting back what you're observing.
Exactly. And that can be incredibly disarming, especially in high-pressure situations. It can help diffuse negative emotions and create a more collaborative atmosphere. And you can also use labeling to reinforce positive emotions, like excitement or enthusiasm, which can create momentum in a negotiation.
This tactical empathy concept is fascinating. It makes me think about those times when I've tried to reason with someone who's upset, only to make things worse. Maybe I should have been focusing on understanding their emotions instead of trying to logic my way out of the situation.
It's a common mistake. We often try to solve problems intellectually, without addressing the underlying emotional currents. But Voss argues that emotions are the real drivers of human behavior. So if you want to be an effective negotiator, you have to learn to speak the language of emotions.
Well, I'm all ears. Let's dive deeper into this world of emotional intelligence and negotiation mastery. Okay, we've explored the power of no, and the surprising effectiveness of tactical empathy. What other mind-blowing negotiation techniques are hidden within the pages of Never Split the Difference?
Well, Voss dives into a concept called calibrated questions, which aren't just about getting to know, but also about subtly steering the conversation where you want it to go.
So it's not about asking random questions, but about strategically phrasing them to elicit specific responses that will move the negotiation forward.
Exactly. Voss shares a story about one of his students, Ryan B., who was desperate to get to Austin to sign a major contract. He'd missed his connecting flight due to weather delays, and the last flight of the day was about to leave.
Oh no! Talk about a high-pressure situation.
At the gate, this couple is furiously yelling at the gate agent, demanding to be put on the flight. The agent is clearly frazzled, but trying to stay professional.
So what did Ryan do? Did he jump into the fray and start pleading his case?
Not at all. He waited for the drama to subside, then approached the gate agent, and calmly used a series of calibrated questions and labels.
Give me an example. What kind of questions?
He started by acknowledging the stressful situation with a label like, "It seems like it's been a chaotic day." Then he followed up with a calibrated question like, "It looks like a lot of people are trying to get to Austin tonight. Is there any possibility a seat might open up?"
Ah, I see the brilliance. He's framing it as a question rather than a demand. He's not putting the agent on the defensive. He's inviting her to collaborate on finding a solution.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And because he was empathetic and respectful, the agent was more inclined to help him. She actually ended up finding him a seat on the flight, even though it was supposedly fully booked.
That's a masterclass in turning a seemingly impossible situation around. It makes me wonder how often I miss opportunities because I'm too direct or forceful in my approach.
Voss argues that calibrated questions work because they give the other person a sense of control. They feel like they're making the decisions, even though you're subtly framing the choices in a way that nudges them towards your desired outcome.
It's like planting seeds in their mind and letting them blossom into the solution you want. So sneaky, yet so effective. Any tips on how to craft these magic questions?
Voss is a big fan of using how and what questions, as opposed to why questions.
Why is that? Don't why questions encourage people to explain their reasoning?
They do, but they can often sound accusatory and trigger defensiveness. It's like you're putting them on trial. How and what questions, on the other hand, tend to be more open-ended and inviting.
So instead of asking, why are you so resistant to this idea, you might ask, what would it take for you to feel comfortable moving forward with this?
Exactly. It shifts the focus from defending their position to exploring potential solutions.
Okay, so how and what questions for collaboration. And avoid why unless you're strategically trying to point out a contradiction or force them to justify their position. Got it. What other negotiation Jedi mind tricks does Voss have in store for us?
He talks about a concept he calls bending reality, which is essentially shaping the perception of what's considered fair in a negotiation.
Okay, that sounds like we're venturing into the realm of psychological warfare.
Not quite. It's not about being unethical or manipulative. It's about understanding how perceptions of fairness are constructed and using that knowledge to your advantage.
Voss uses a gripping story from a kidnapping case in Haiti to illustrate this concept. The kidnappers were demanding a ransom of $150,000, which was far beyond what the family could afford.
Right, and this is where an understanding of deadlines becomes crucial. Voss and his team recognized that the kidnappers had a self-imposed deadline. They wanted to get the ransom and vanish before the weekend.
So they used that deadline against them.
They did. They strategically stalled the negotiations, making it seem like they were struggling to raise the funds. This created a sense of urgency and desperation on the part of the kidnappers.
And as the clock ticked down, the kidnappers' demands started to soften.
Exactly. They went from demanding $150,000 to accepting a much lower amount, just to ensure they got something before their window of opportunity closed.
So the lesson here is that deadlines can be powerful leverage points, even when it seems like you're the one under pressure.
Voss also warns against accepting the other side's definition of fair. He points out that fair is subjective and often used as a tactic to extract concessions.
It's like that old saying, one man's trash is another man's treasure.
Exactly. So when someone throws out the fairness card, don't just cave. Instead, challenge them to define what they mean by fair. This forces them to justify their position and often reveals flaws in their logic.
Okay, so don't be afraid to push back on those fuzzy notions of fairness. Got it.
Yeah.
What other reality-bending techniques does Voss have up his sleeve?
He talks about the power of anchoring, which is about setting expectations and influencing the other side's perception of value. He's a big fan of starting with an extreme anchor.
An extreme anchor, what does that look like?
He describes a situation where he was negotiating a speaking fee with a bar association. He started by saying, "By the time we get off the phone, you're going to think I'm a lousy businessman. You're going to think I can't budget or plan. You're going to think Chris Voss is a big talker who screwed up his first big project after leaving the FBI."
Whoa, talk about setting the bar low.
Right. He's deliberately anchoring their expectations at a point of extreme negativity. So when he finally reveals his actual fee, it seems incredibly reasonable by comparison.
It's brilliant, but it takes guts to pull off. You have to be willing to make yourself look bad in the short term to achieve a better outcome in the long run.
Remember, it's all about playing with perceptions. And anchoring works both ways. If you let the other side anchor the negotiation, you're likely to end up with a less favorable deal. That's why Voss recommends delaying making the first offer whenever possible.
Let them reveal their hand first, so you can adjust your strategy accordingly. Smart.
Voss also has a fascinating tip about using odd numbers in negotiations.
Odd numbers, that sounds completely random.
It might seem strange, but he argues that odd numbers, especially non-round numbers, can have a powerful psychological impact.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Explain it to me.
When you offer someone a round number, like $100 or $1,000, it feels like an invitation to negotiate. But when you throw out an odd number, like $987 or $1,023, it feels more specific, more definitive.
Like you've carefully calculated it, and there's no room for wiggle room.
Exactly. It signals that you've done your research.
Yeah.
And this is the best you can do.
So if I'm aiming for $1,000, I should counter with $987 or $1,013 to make it seem less negotiable.
Precisely. It's a subtle but effective way to shape the perception of what's reasonable and acceptable.
I love these mind games. It really highlights how negotiation is as much about psychology as it is about logic and bargaining.
Now, Voss introduces a concept that takes this psychological understanding to another level: the black swan.
Is this like that movie with Natalie Portman?
Not quite. In the context of negotiation, a black swan is a game-changing piece of information that completely reshapes the dynamics of the situation. It's that crucial bit of knowledge that you didn't even know you were missing.
So it's like stumbling upon a hidden treasure chest in the middle of a negotiation.
Voss uses a gripping story about the kidnapping of Jeff Schilling to illustrate this concept. He was an American tourist held captive by the Abu Sayyaf terrorist group in the Philippines. The situation was incredibly tense, with the kidnappers demanding a huge ransom, and the risk of Schilling being killed very real.
How do they find that game-changing black swan in such a high-stakes situation?
They realized they hadn't truly grasped the kidnappers' motivations. The Abu Sayyaf weren't purely driven by money. They were seeking what they call war damages, essentially compensation for centuries of perceived oppression by the West.
So their demand wasn't just about greed. It was fueled by a deep-seated sense of historical injustice. That changes everything.
Once Voss and his team understood this, they shifted their approach. They started acknowledging the Abu Sayyaf's grievances and framed the negotiation in terms of finding a way to address those grievances.
It's like they suddenly start speaking the same language. Not just literally, but in terms of understanding the kidnappers' deeply held beliefs and motivations.
And it worked. By tapping into the kidnappers' worldview, they de-escalated the situation and eventually negotiated Schilling's release.
Wow. That story really highlights the power of uncovering those hidden motivations. It's not always about what's on the surface. It's about digging deeper to understand the other side's religion, as Voss calls it.
Exactly. He's not necessarily referring to religious beliefs, but to the core principles that guide someone's actions. What are their fundamental values? What are their non-negotiables? What do they truly care about?
Okay, so how do we uncover these black swans in our own negotiations? Do we need to become amateur psychologists?
Well, active listening is key. Pay attention not just to what people are saying, but how they're saying it. Are there any inconsistencies in their words or body language? Are they avoiding certain topics? What emotions are they revealing, even unintentionally?
So it's like being a detective, searching for those subtle clues that might point to something deeper.
And then you use calibrated questions to gently probe for more information. Instead of asking direct questions that could put them on the defensive, use open-ended questions that encourage them to reveal their thinking.
So instead of saying, "Are you worried about this clause in the contract?" I might ask, "What are your thoughts on this section of the agreement?"
Exactly. It invites them to share their perspective without feeling like they're being interrogated.
And once we've uncovered those black swans, how do we actually use them to our advantage?
Voss breaks down leverage in negotiation into three types. The first is positive leverage. your ability to offer something the other side wants.
That's the most straightforward type of leverage. If they want your product, your service, or your expertise, you've got something they value.
Then there's negative leverage, your ability to inflict loss or pain. This is the classic stick in the carrot and stick approach.
So this is where threats and ultimatums come into play. If you don't agree to my terms, I'll walk away from the deal, that kind of thing.
Exactly. But Voss cautions against relying too heavily on negative leverage. It can be effective in the short term, but it can also damage relationships and create resentment.
It's like playing with fire. You might get what you want in the moment, but you could end up burning bridges in the long run.
Now, the third type of leverage, and the one Voss believes is the most powerful, is normative leverage.
Normative leverage. I've never heard of that.
This is about tapping into your counterpart's own values and beliefs to persuade them. It's about aligning your proposal with their worldview, making them see that what you're offering is consistent with what they already believe in. It's about speaking their language.
Can you give me an example of that?
Voss describes a negotiation with a CEO who was very religious. He constantly referenced his faith and how it guided his decision-making.
So Voss used those religious beliefs as a way to connect with him.
Precisely. Instead of just focusing on the financial terms of the deal, Voss framed his arguments in terms of values like honesty, integrity, and responsibility, which he knew were important to the CEO.
It's like he was speaking to his heart, not just his wallet.
Exactly. And it worked. By tapping into the CEO's religion, Voss was able to build trust and rapport, which ultimately led to a successful negotiation.
It makes me think about those times when I've tried to convince someone of something by bombarding them with facts and logic, only to have them completely shut down. Maybe I should have been focusing on understanding and appealing to their values instead.
It's a common mistake. We assume that everyone is motivated by the same things as we are. But the truth is, everyone has their own unique worldview, their own set of values and beliefs that shape their decisions.
So the key is to not just uncover those black swans, but to use them strategically to create leverage that resonates with the other person's deepest values.
That's where the real magic happens. You're not just negotiating a deal. You're negotiating a shared reality.
This is all so insightful, but uncovering black swans requires a keen eye for detail and a willingness to really dig deep to understand the other person's motivations. Are there any other examples of how to unearth these hidden gems?
Voss tells the story of one of his students who was negotiating the purchase of a student housing complex. The seller was eager to get rid of the property, even though it had a 100% occupancy rate.
That seems counterintuitive. Why would someone want to sell a property that's clearly performing well?
That's exactly what the student thought. It didn't make sense logically. So he started asking calibrated questions to try to understand the seller's motivations.
What did he find?
It turned out the seller had other properties in more desirable locations and needed to liquidate this one quickly to cover some debts. This was the black swan, a hidden constraint that gave the students significant leverage to negotiate a much lower price.
So sometimes it's not about what the other side wants, but about what they need. And those needs might not be immediately apparent.
Voss emphasizes that while uncovering black swans can be challenging, the payoff can be huge, especially in complex or high-stakes negotiations. It's all about being observant, asking the right questions, and being open to challenging your assumptions.
This is mind-blowing stuff. It's making me rethink my whole approach to negotiation. I'm realizing how much I've been leaving on the table by not truly understanding the psychology of the other person. We've uncovered some seriously powerful negotiation tactics from never split the difference, but I have to admit, I'm feeling a bit overwhelmed. It's one thing to understand these concepts, but how do we actually put them into practice?
That's a great question, and one that Voss anticipates. He provides a really practical tool in his book called the Negotiation One Sheet. It helps you map out your negotiation strategy in a way that incorporates all the psychological dynamics we've been discussing.
Okay, so this is how we take all this theory and turn it into action. Tell me everything. What exactly is on this negotiation one sheet?
First, you define your goals. What do you really want to achieve in this negotiation? What's your dream outcome? Voss encourages you to be ambitious here. Write down the most audacious goal you can imagine, even if it seems like a long shot.
So shoot for the moon. But it's important to have a safety net too, right? We need to know our walkaway point.
Absolutely. That's where your BTNA comes in. Your best alternative to a negotiated agreement. It's essentially your plan B. What will you do if you can't reach an agreement that meets your needs? Knowing your BATNA gives you the confidence to walk away from a bad deal, which strengthens your position.
Okay, so goals and BATNA, check and check. What's next?
Now it's time to shift your focus to the other side of the table. Who are you dealing with? What are their motivations? What are their fears? What are their values? This is where all that deep research and intel gathering we discussed comes in handy.
And I bet this is also where those calibrated questions can help us pry open those mental vaults. Questions like, what are your biggest concerns about this proposal? Or what would make you feel more comfortable moving forward?
You got it. The goal here is to unearth those black swans, those hidden pieces of information that can give you leverage, and allow you to tailor your arguments and offers in a way that truly resonates with the other person.
So we're basically creating a psychological profile of our negotiation counterpart. The more we know about them, the better we can navigate the conversation.
Voss also suggests something he calls an accusation audit, which sounds a bit intense.
An accusation audit? What in the world is that?
It's a clever strategy for preempting the negative thoughts the other side might have about you or your proposal. List all the bad things they might be thinking, even if they're not saying them out loud.
So if I'm asking for a raise, my accusation audit might include things like she's being greedy, or he's not worth that much, or the company can't afford to give everyone a raise.
Exactly. By proactively acknowledging these negative perceptions, you take away their power. It's like disarming a bomb before it can explode.
It also shows that you're not afraid to address the elephant in the room, which can build trust and credibility.
Now, the final piece of the negotiation one-sheet is to outline your non-round offers.
Right, we talked about the psychological impact of using odd numbers in negotiations. But how do we actually arrive at those numbers? Do we just randomly subtract a few dollars or cents from our target?
There's a method to the madness. Voss recommends using the Ackerman model. First, determine your target price, then work backward, creating a series of progressively smaller concessions.
So if my target is $10,000, I might start by offering $6,500, then $8,500, then $9,500, and finally, ending with a firm offer of $9,975.
Precisely. The key is to make each concession seem increasingly painful. That way, when you finally land on your non-round number, it feels like the other side has truly squeezed you for everything you've got.
It's a brilliant tactic, but it requires a lot of discipline, doesn't it? You have to resist the urge to make a big concession early on, or get emotionally attached to a specific number.
That's the beauty of the negotiation one-sheet. It forces you to plan all this out in advance, so you can go into the negotiation with a clear strategy, a cool head, and a sense of confidence.
So with this negotiation one sheet in hand, we're basically armed with a psychological roadmap to navigate any negotiation successfully.
Think of it as your cheat sheet for understanding the other person's mind and guiding them towards an agreement that works for both of you.
This has been an incredible journey into the world of FBI negotiation tactics. It's eye-opening to realize how much of successful negotiation hinges on understanding human psychology and mastering these subtle yet powerful communication techniques.
And the beauty of it is, you can apply these principles in virtually any area of life, not just in high-stakes business deals.
Absolutely. Whether you're negotiating a salary, buying a car, resolving a conflict with a loved one, or just trying to get your kids to eat their vegetables. These insights can empower you to communicate more effectively, build stronger relationships, and ultimately, get what you want.
It's about understanding that negotiation isn't about manipulation or trickery. It's about finding creative solutions that benefit everyone involved.
I'm definitely feeling inspired to put all of this into practice. A huge thank you to Chris Voss for sharing his wisdom in Never Split the Difference. And to all our listeners, I encourage you to dive into this book and discover the power of negotiation for yourself.
And don't forget to check out the show notes for a link to Chris Voss's book and other resources on negotiation. Until next time, happy negotiating.